You could argue that Osama bin Laden was the most hated man in America. He's the name we all know on the FBI most wanted list. He's the one whose death sparked dancing in the streets on Sunday. He's the one who inspired this Onion headline, "Violent Death of Human Being, Terrific News for Once." You could also argue that as hated as bin Laden was in this country, he was almost equally irrelevant in the Arab world. His vision of using terrorism to form an ultra-Orthodox Islamic State considered a relic by the young people agitating to oust their current crop of dictators and replace them with democracy. Bin Laden hated democracy. But to the fervent few who made up Osama bin Laden's following in the world, he was a charismatic and powerful leader. Al-Qaeda functioned almost as a cult of personality for him, with his manufactured personal myth, his oodles of family money, his twisted self-deifying pseudo-religiosity at its center. He was tall and rugged and a good talker, especially when he was talking about himself, which he always was. He told a story about forsaking his privileged life in a wealthy family for a campaign of radical violence. He also tried hard to portray himself as the modern-day heir to the Prophet Muhammad, dressing like him, welcoming the comparison. That's what was so awesome about that book, supposedly by bin Laden's ex-wife, which said bin Laden smoked a lot of pot and lusted obsessively after Whitney Houston. Remember that? I would bet money that whole book was made up, but don't you think it drove him nuts that that was out there? Osama bin Laden's death is not the death of Al-Qaeda as an organization. They are still here. But the good news now about Al-Qaeda is that the man likely to succeed bin Laden as their leader, whatever bin Laden had, this guy does not have it.
Number two, Zawahiri is not charismatic. He was not involved in the fight earlier on in Afghanistan. And I think he has a lot of detractors within the organization. And I think you're going to see them start eating themselves from within more and more.
White House terrorism advisor John Brennan. Mr. Not So Charismatic, Ayman al-Zawahiri, is a doctor. He's the guy on the sitting right next to bin Laden here, always trying to prove himself. See how close we are? Zawahiri has been Osama bin Laden's second in command in al-Qaeda since at least 1998, and by a bunch of different accounts, he's not a very likable or inspiring terrorist, even if you are a hair-on-fire extremist yourself. For one thing, Zawahiri is from Egypt, and in al-Qaeda, apparently that's not good. Ali Soufan, an FBI special agent who has interviewed many al-Qaeda operatives, wrote in a New York Times op-ed today that although al-Qaeda recruits come from many countries, within the organization, apparently it's sort of everybody who's not Egyptian against everyone who is Egyptian. Quote, even soccer games pit Egyptians against Persian Gulf Arabs. Al-Qaeda soccer. They can't do shirts versus skins, modesty, so it's everyone in shirts versus all the Egyptian guys in shirts. Why is being an Egyptian a strike against you in al-Qaeda? I do not know. But apparently it is. And with an Egyptian guy as the apparent next al-Qaeda boss, that sounds like cause for dissension and disunity in al-Qaeda, which is great news for the rest of the world. Also, in a post-9/11 world of an already fragmented al-Qaeda, the work of trying to consolidate power and authority the way bin Laden did from the group's founding, there's never been another leader. That will fall to Mr. Not So Charismatic from Egypt, from a position of him already having a $25 million bounty on his head and already being on the run. Even from on the run, when Mr. Not So Charismatic has been able to put out statements in the past few years, they have mostly served to annoy other radicals or to unsuccessfully hitch al-Qaeda's wagon to other unrelated movements that really don't want anything to do with them. The New York Times, for example, reporting today that Mr. Not So Charismatic has issued 5 recordings this year in which he tried to hitch the pro-democracy Arab Spring to 9/11 with precisely 0 success, which is probably why he tried 5 times to do it. Quote, Mr. Zawahiri even apologized in his messages for being behind the curve on developments in the Arab world, a result of being on the run, he said. Or maybe just the result of him being the Home Office nag who everybody hates. The Brookings Institute reporting today that Ayman al-Zawahiri is most known in al-Qaeda for berating other groups like Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood because he says they stray from the true path that he follows. Anyway, those groups never liked him anyway. For one thing, Mr. Zawahiri is widely believed to have ratted out the Muslim Brotherhood and others 30 years ago when he was in prison in Egypt. A rat. I'm sure that's very popular in the ruthless international terrorist world. We are all waiting to see what the U.S. will do with bin Laden's hard drive, with the intel they collected from the house where they killed bin Laden. Maybe they'll be able to use that to roll up al-Qaeda Central and Zawahiri with it. But if he survives long enough to take over the reins of al-Qaeda Central from dead bin Laden, he will never be another bin Laden. And in a week of good things that it sometimes feels awkward to call good, that would be a good thing. Thanks for joining us tonight. Now it's time for The Ed Show.